Hello and welcome to Calls. This is the 2022 Charles Schwab Initial Research Show. Going to be a pretty short show tonight. I feel quite under the weather, and I will neither confirm nor deny it's from my awful PGA bets this past week. No, but seriously, if you had Justin Thomas, congratulations. He started the week at 14-1, and by the middle of the round today, he was up to 24-1. So if you had that, congratulations. If you had Mito Pereira, I'm really sorry. That is going to be a brutal loss for you. He's very talented. The PGA Tour is in good hands with all this young talent. Will Zalatoris is going to get a major here fairly soon. I strongly believe that. Mito's going to get a win. But Justin Thomas, proven winner, battled all weekend on the wrong side of the draw, nonetheless. Pardon me if I take a lot of water breaks and such. Like I said, I feel pretty under the weather. But let's get right into the show and what I can cover tonight. All statistics provided tonight and every night are from fantasynational.com. It is simply the best tool out there. It's going to make you a much better gambler, a much smarter DFS player. Go check them out. It is well worth the investment. In the descriptions of all three shows in the streaming services, Rumble, Twitch, and YouTube, there are links to my social media where I post interesting research throughout the week for golf and for baseball content, as well as my golf betting card. Last week I had some interesting research put out on Monday and said that there were 8 players that qualified in the show, in the Monday night data dive show. Justin Thomas was one of the 8 that qualified under the parameters that I put out on Twitter. So if you want to be a part of that interesting research, give me a follow at the links in the descriptions of the show. And then finally, we are live. Chat is open. I'm going to keep it a little bit minimal tonight so I can get through as much as I can. But I do want to hear from you all. How did you all do this past week? How was your DFS? Did you have Justin Thomas? Yeah, all that good stuff. So let's get right into it. Let's do our initial research for the 2022 Charles Schwab. And we move over here to Fantasy National. The GCSAA tournament fact sheet is not out yet, so hopefully we'll have that tomorrow. And hopefully I will feel a whole lot better and won't have to cut the stream short or feel like I'm rushing through it. But we are at Colonial Country Club for the Charles Schwab. It has been here for as long as I can remember. It's not been called the Charles Schwab the entire time, but the course has not changed over the years. It is still here at Colonial Country Club. And obviously the PGA Championship stats aren't in here, but there are quite a few big name players still listed in the field. I'm not sure if that's going to remain the case the week after a major championship. A lot of times these bigger players will say they're in the field and then end up withdrawing. But for now, the only name that I have seen that is withdrawn is Harris English. He is replaced by Mark Hubbard in the field. So let's get right into what we have here for Colonial. And it'll be much better tomorrow when the tournament fact sheet is out. But a rough calculation based on the yardages here in Fantasy National shows that it is a 7,200 yard course, about 7,209 to be exact. So right on the cusp of being labeled a short course by Fantasy National standards. And it plays pretty tough. You see here the 9th and 10th most difficult holes is where I like to start with on a scorecard to get a feel for how tough a course can be. 9th plays a bit over par. The 10th plays a bit over par. You have to come to the 11th toughest hole for it to be exactly par, so slightly on the more difficult end. There have been a few rounds here and there that have been easy over the years, but mostly this tournament is difficult. The scoring average is difficult. The strokes gained by shot type here at Colonial, it is pretty a normal distribution, really. Strokes gained approach and putting, and then off the tee and around the green, that's for the top 5s. You move to for the top tens. You move to the top fives. Approach and putting really start to distance themselves from the other two, and then your winners is all in approach and putting. I will have to do more research tomorrow. I was feeling quite under the weather. I'm going to have to see if any putting form is required coming into the Colonial, because the weeks of the winners, they all putt the daylights out. So I'm going to have to see if putting form is an important factor coming in. But there's a quick look at the importance of the shot types here at Charles Schwab, here at Colonial. When you go to look at the strokes gained by hole by par, it's quite different than what I see data-wise, or at least the initial look of it. So top tens here, you see the par fours outweigh the par threes, and the par fives a little bit surprising, because most of the time par fives are what is the most important hole on the PGA Tour, at least by strokes gained. But when you move to the top fives, the par threes really start to rise. They all start to really even out as they've been the whole time, and then the winners, the par threes, actually take a slight-ish lead on the par three or on the par fives. No, that's roughly the same. And the par fours drop. So the par fours don't really change in importance across the top tens, top fives, and winners. They get slightly more important, sure, but they lose in value related to the other pars, threes and fives. So it's quite interesting to see. Yet the data that I have studied, that I had a chance to, says that the par fours are really, really important here. So it's going to be interesting to look into the data dive tomorrow and see what is going on there with that data. There is a look at the strokes gained by hole by par. We move to the hole composition, and you have 7 par fours from 400 to 450 yards, and then 3 of the par threes measure from 175 to 200. So with this being a par 70 like we just had at Southern Hills, over half of the par fours measure in this length here. So it'll be important to see tomorrow if that is a major factor. And then 3 of the 4 par threes measure here. So we'll see if that is an important factor as well. The approach shot distribution, with this being a shorter course, the most approach shots at this course come from 125 to 150 and 150 to 175. And with some varying degree of more importance in the average tour event. So again, we'll see if that is a major factor tomorrow. We'll see if I can get into it tonight, but I'm not making any promises with the way I feel. But there is a look at the supposed most important proximities here at Colonial. Historic cut line here has typically been above par, generally around +2, which makes it technically an average difficulty. But it has had some years where it's been as high as +5, +4, and there's been some years where it's been -1 or even. So the course can play pretty difficult, pretty easy. It's kind of all over the place depending on quality of field, everything, wind, all that stuff, all that good stuff this week. So right around +2 is generally the average cut line here at Colonial. And you can see the relative average difficulty, maybe even in a bit on the higher side of difficult, with the birdies, bogeys, and doubles. So you've got 18% or a little bit more than 18% birdies here at Colonial. You've got 14.5 or a little bit more on bogeys, but the doubles really kind of on top of the bogeys about evens these two out. Birdies and bogeys plus doubles. And then the eagles are pretty non-existent here. It is just not a course that you eagle, and a lot of that being from the layup course that it is. So you see the accuracy here is a lot less than the tour average. So normally that would mean that you are trying to bomb, or distance is the big thing here. Well, I'm going to cheat, skip a few charts. Distance is actually a lot lower here too. So it's just generally tough to find the fairways, especially when you're trying to lay up. It's just not an easy driving course. Greens and regulation percentage also smaller than the less than the tour average. We'll have to see if the GCSAA tournament fact sheet comes out, hopefully by tomorrow night, that if we'll see if the greens are smaller than the average tour event, or if it really signifies the difficulty, that greens are harder to hit here. Scrambling percentage, players are successful at scrambling here just a bit more than the average tour event. 3 putts per round, slightly less than the average tour event. And then the proximity, this would lead me to believe that it's the greens are a lot smaller, because the proximity to the hole with a green in regulation is quite a bit closer than the average tour event, almost 4 feet. So that's why putting is such a dominant factor here, I imagine, is that if you're a lot closer to the hole, obvious statements are going to be obvious that going to give you a better chance to hit your putts, but guys are generally going to be making your 25 footers, 20 footers and such here. As you can see, normally this bar here for 25 feet plus is real small. 25 foot plus birdie putts is actually more common here than the average tour event. And you can see that a lot of times this will be right at the tour average and then all the way down, but you've got more birdie putts from 10 to 15 feet here than the average tour event, more than 15 to 20, so putting being a major factor this week. So it'll be interesting to see if putting form is needed. But there's a look at Colonial from a scorecard and graphical view. Let's move on over to the tournament history tab here. I've already sorted this by strokes gained total for the past 5 years. Of course, just going back only to 2017, and we don't have to worry about cutting out any years. This has been at Colonial for as long as I can remember. So the number one player in strokes gained total in the field this week is Jordan Spieth. He's had quite a bit of success here. No surprise, being a Texas native. 4 top 10s, 2 runner-ups, and a top 35, middling-ish finish. Justin Rose, your champion in 2018. Kevin Na, your champion in 2019. Your defending champion is Jason Kokrak. Last year, coming off a T3 in 2020, and then a win last year. Middling-ish finish, just like Jordan Spieth in 2018, missed the cut in 17. But he has had some success here, and that is some of the research that I did today. Some of the winners here, going back to 2012, which is as far back as Fantasy National has. The winners here at the Charles Schwab have had success previously here at Colonial. So it seems like you either really like this course or you really don't. Daniel Berger is a bit of an exception. He had only played it one time the year prior. It was still a cut made, not a lot of success, but it was still a cut made. So it's going to be very important to see players who have made the cut the previous year. That is some of the research that I was doing throughout the week for the Charles Schwab, since my PGA was essentially done Friday. But it's one of those tournaments or courses that you either really like or you really don't. But there is a look at some of the players that generally play Colonial well. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I'm just going to sort it this way. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got Beau Hossler, Adam Schenk, Nick Taylor, Sam Ryder. Some of these, like Nick Watney, has a top 10, but 2 missed cuts and a clunker of a made cut. Ryan Palmer, surprisingly, he's got a top 10, but a clunker of a made cut, 2 miscuts and a middling finish last year. So being a Texas native, it's surprising to see Ryan Palmer not too high on the strokes gained total list. Let's see, Pat Gazire the same way. He generally plays Texas pretty well. Top 5 last year, but 2 miscuts and 2 clunkers of made cuts. So again, it's one of those courses where you either love it or you hate it. And so there's a look at the players who at each end of the spectrum love and hate it. I'll just go ahead and pull up your leaderboard from last year. And in fact, let's go ahead and pull up the full tournament factor history. So last year, played to about average, 2 rounds of average, 2 rounds of difficult, right on the cut line there. You had a little bit of wind, but nothing out of the ordinary for Texas. Green speeds have generally been fast. They have slowed them down a little bit in the past if they needed to, but we are on bent greens. As I mentioned, you've had a few easy rounds sneak in from time to time, but generally it's average to difficult, and a lot of times it is on the difficult end, as you can see from here. The rough is generally average. It's not impossible to play out of, but it is certainly not easy to play out of. The course can run anywhere from 72 to 74, generally on the shorter end. Sometimes it will run under 7,200. So there's a look at the tournament conditions historically here at Colonial. And there's the leaderboard from last year. You had Justin Kokrak win by 2 at 14 under. That's, again, roughly deemed average here by Fantasy National standards. You had Spieth, Kazire, let's see, some other players coming off some good PGA success here. Adam Hadwin made the cut. Trying to think, Abraham Answer had a very good PGA championship. Taylor Gooch had a very good PGA championship. Both of them top 20 last year. Let's see. Yeah. So not a lot of these guys has very successful PGA championships. They may have made the cut, but certainly did not threaten on the weekend. Let's see. I think that's going to do it for Fantasy National. And again, I apologize. It's going to be a pretty short show. I feel quite under the weather. But I do have a little bit of some spreadsheet for you all to look at. So let's go ahead and bring that up here. This is the historical results like we just saw in Fantasy National, the strokes gained total. This is broken out by each metric that is measured here at, or is measured by Fantasy National for here at Colonial. So you see here, Bubba Watson has played 1 time in the past 5 years. He did finish 7th, and there's his stats for it. I'm going to filter this out and see if we can get a feeling of what plays well here when a player has played multiple times. So I'm going to filter out all the guys that have played only once. So you have Colin Morikawa, who's played it twice. Jordan Spieth, he was the strokes gained total leader. So you see here you've got a lot of putting from Jordan Spieth. No real surprise there. Distance, not really that much of a factor. Sometimes it can be for guys and others not really. Kevin Na, a champion in 2019. He has never been a distance factor in tournaments. Let's see, Brian Harmon generally does well here. He's not about distance. So distance is not mandatory. At the same time, fairways aren't really mandatory either. Justin Thomas has played here a couple of times, has not seemingly hit a fairway at all and done okay. Jordan Spieth the same way. Let's see, Harris English, who's withdrawn, by the way. Harris English has withdrawn, but he's played well and not hit a lot of fairways. Robert Streb. Let's see, conversely, it looks like it could be greens. That is somewhat important. Would make a lot of sense if greens are harder to hit and They probably are smaller. We'll have to see tomorrow in the Data Dive show if that's the case when the GCSAA tournament fact sheet comes out. But there is a look at a few of the players, or at least the players that have done well here, played multiple times, and the success that they've had, at least in the umbrella stats. I'm going to remove that filter. The last little thing that I want to bring up for you all is the comparison course sheet that I work on. This is a spreadsheet that I've put together that compares other full field courses against each other, minus the majors, since those roll every year to different courses. So you see, Memorial, where we're at next week. Muirfield is, been the home of the nationwide Memorial for a long time. Travelers at TBC, River Highlands, John Deere. So these places that have had a course there for a long time, or at least enough years to gather data. This is a spreadsheet comparing those courses against each other using the various metrics. So here at Colonial, strokes gained approach is about a half a shot more important than the average course of a full field event on the PGA Tour. And as much as we've seen putting be a big factor, it is only about a tenth of a shot more important. So we will see again if putting form coming in is mandatory, or if those winners in the past 5 years have just had a really hot putter that week. And if that's the case, we're going to want to see or get an idea of who are the putters that can just go blistering hot for 1 week. Maybe not even be the best putters, but somebody like Cameron Champ, who can roll 9.5 strokes gained putting in a week and win a tournament. So we'll have to see if there is a what Colonial demands, whether it's just good putting outright or if it demands a hot putter. We just looked at it a little bit, but distance not a factor at all here at Colonial. Fairways exactly even with the average course of a full field event on the PGA Tour, so not a lot to glean there. Good drives gained and greens in regulation, so it's more so leaning that greens are going to be the important factor this week. We scroll over for eagles, birdies, and whatnot. Birdies gained a tenth of a stroke more important than the average full field event, but bogeys being 2/10 less important. So this right here makes you think that it's birdies gained. We'll see again more in the data dive tomorrow. We move over here. Par threes, not important at all, at least in relation to the average course of a full field event, which is striking because of the graphs that we saw in Fantasy National. So I'm not sure what to make of that. The total par threes, a tenth of a shot less important. Now the par threes 175 to 200 are more important than the average course for a full field event. So just like we saw graphically in Fantasy National, 3 of the 4 par threes fall into this range. So perhaps instead of total par threes, we focus on that range of par threes. That's what I am leaning towards early on in this week. Scroll over for the par fours, and this is why I was a little confused graphically. The par fours are 3 quarters of a shot more important here at at Colonial than they are at the average full field course. Par fours 350 to 400 and 400 to 450. Extremely important. But yet graphically, at least in relation to the par threes and the par fives, they weren't. So very interesting to see. I tend to want to believe this data here. So we're going to do some heavy scrutiny tomorrow on the par fours and see how important they are exactly. Because if you scroll over here, I mean, you can see it. The par fives it says it's almost a full shot less important than the average full course for a full field event. So very, very odd to see graphically when numbers wise it shows this. So but I'm thinking these two lengths of par fours are going to be very, very important. Par fours in general, the 175 to 200 par threes, very important. Then the par fives, as you see here, it just doesn't seem like there is a lot of importance on them here at Colonial. Almost a full shot less important here, half a shot, 3/4 of a shot. So par fives looks like they're mitigated here, which would make some sense. There's only 2 par fives on the course. And then finally, I'll scroll over here. The last thing I'm going to cover tonight is the proximities. We saw that 125 to 150 and 150 to 175 were the lengths of approach that were most prevalent here at Colonial. And it looks like 150 to 175 may be slightly more important than the average full field course, but not by much. But total proximity does seem to have some bit of merit, so we'll cover proximity pretty heavily tomorrow as well. So that is going to do it for the show tonight. Again, I apologize that it's extremely short. Just feel completely under the weather. I'll bring you back to this spreadsheet so you can see that as I sign off. But in the comments of the show, let me know how you did this week in DFS, or if you had Justin Thomas. My DFS was pretty bad. I was not nearly high enough on Mito. I did not use enough Will Zalatoris, thinking that he was chalky. Tried to go other places. The guys that I wanted to do well in terms of being unique just didn't do well enough at all. Hadwin had made the cut and then went something like 79 on Saturday. It was just things like that just didn't pan out in my favor. So in the comments, let me know how you did this week. But thanks for taking the time to watch. Again, I apologize, it's a short show. I will try to rest up tomorrow to provide a longer show and a much more in-depth show. But thanks again for tuning in for all of the wagers you had this past week at the PGA Championship, for all of the DFS contests that you entered at the PGA Championship. And until I see you tomorrow night for the Data Dive show, may all your bets be profitable.